Okay, Module 6, Administering Reporting Services. In this module, we'll take a look at administering the reporting service and monitoring reporting services. Let's start with administering. So first of all, we have the Reporting Services Configuration Manager. So this is a tool that administrators will use to configure a reporting services installation. It's used to configure the service accounts, to create and configure the URLs to the report server and report manager in native mode, to create and configure the report server databases, configure a scale-out deployment, backup and restore and replace encryption keys. So it's important to note that sensitive data is stored inside the report server database in the form of the credentials of your data sources, but also the intermediate format is encrypted as well. So what it will do at installation time is generate a unique encryption key that it uses to encrypt the sensitive data in that report server database. It's important if you ever have to reinstall reporting services that you have backed that key up so that you can reapply the key and therefore have the report server make sense of the content of your backed up report server databases. If you don't have that key, the worst that would happen is you have to reapply the credentials and you lose your snapshots. For email delivery, you have to configure where's that email server and what's the email address that would be used to send the emails. So let's see that in demonstration. So here under SQL Server 2008 R2 configuration tools, we have the Reporting Services Configuration Manager. So I have two instances of reporting services on this machine. So we need to specify which instance are we connecting to. So it'll be the default instance. And so the first page allows you to interrogate details about the instance. So what edition, what version of reporting services is it? What mode is it? And the status of the service. And you can stop and start the service from here. The service account, this is usually set up during installation, but it can be maintained here. The web service URL to the endpoint itself, so this is where you configure the ports, the IP addresses, and if you're using secure communication, which is a recommendation, this is where you configure this. The databases are provisioned here, so you have the ability to provision the databases. This is where you make the decision to move to SharePoint integrated mode. You would go ahead here and you'd create databases that are specific to SharePoint integrated mode that uses a different schema, slightly different. For that reason, there is no migration path between the two different modes because it uses a different setup there. For native mode, you can specify what the virtual directory name is for Reports Manager. Your email configuration is configured here. The execution account specifies an account that is used for data sources that don't require credentials. This is the identity that will be used to communicate with them. Images sitting on web servers on remote servers. What credentials does it use to get across to that web server would be based on the account that you specify here. Your encryption keys here can be backed up, restored, or replaced, or removed. If you delete the keys, you delete the sensitive data from the report server database. And then to configure scale-out deployment, it's managed from here. So managing encryption keys. It uses an encryption key to secure credentials and connection information that is stored in the report server database. The key is created during installation. It's important to back it up. Restoration is required when changing the Windows service account, renaming the computer or instance, or migrating or recovering a report server installation. So a best practice says as soon as you install, the first thing you should do is back up that key and store it somewhere securely. Managing your report server databases. Well, they are SQL Server databases, so they require the same attention as perhaps your production databases. Appreciate that the report server database stores content, so your report definitions, configurations, snapshots, and system properties and logs that we'll explore shortly. So you should use the full recovery model and potentially back up the database and the transaction log. For the report server temp.db, it's less important because this is temporary data. It consists of typically intermediate format that is either cached or session level. So it doesn't really make sense to ever restore from this. So it's appropriate to use a simple recovery model for this database. So consider using different backup strategies. The only reason to back up the TempDB database is that avoid having to recreate both databases at install time. So let me explain. If you have to reinstall reporting services, you can't create one of the databases only. And if you haven't taken a full backup of the TempDB database, the report server TempDB database, you're forced to have to create the pair of them. All right, so if you have a full backup at least once of it, at least you can restore it. And now we come to monitoring reporting services. So there are log files, and there's a report execution log that provides a wealth of information about requests for reports and the status of those requests. So reporting services log files, it uses a variety of these files to record information about server operations and status. So the report server execution log is really a table in the report server database, and each report execution is stored there. I'll show you shortly. There's a trace log that stores detailed information about requests, and an HTTP log that keeps a record of every HTTP request and response stored on the file system. So we'll focus on the report execution log in this module. It can be turned on or off. By default, I think it's on for 60 days, which means it keeps 60 days worth of information. So on the 61st day, it gets rid of the first day, and so on. Log data is stored in the report server database, and if required, data should be extracted periodically. I think it's important data to have, if not just as an audit trail to know what people are doing, but also to know that those reports you've written and published are actually being used. There's nothing more frustrating than having people come to you and say, I need this report tomorrow, it's so urgent. And then you go, well, I know it'll be ran once and never again. I've had those situations where you look back at history and you go, look, all of those urgent reports seem to be just really one-off. So you can keep this history. Now, what's great is that Codeplex.com includes a sample project that if you search for server management report samples, what it does is it includes a script to create a database that's essentially like a data warehouse. Star schema design, user reports, I think rendering format, other dimensions, and then an integration services package that you can schedule to execute on a periodic basis that will incrementally extract from this log and load it into this database so you can accumulate the history outside of the report server. If you're going to run this once a week, then I would turn that retention policy down to 10 days because you don't need the 60 days. Just ensure that that package is extracting the data out into this database. Now what's cool is it comes with its own suite of reports that allows you to report across report usage, right? And if you're really that keen, you could build a cube on top of this and slice and dice to understand what users are requesting what reports, when and how often. But it also includes statistics about how long did it take to retrieve the data, how long did it take to render the data. And this is where you could also troubleshoot long-running reports. Okay, and if reports are failing, the status code is stored here as well. So there's a wealth of information that I suggest you actually store somewhere and accumulate.